The first window explodes inward and scatters glass across the wooden floor. Smoke rolls down the corridor like a low wave. In the east room, soldiers move fast and quiet, faces streaked with soot, hands hauling furniture to a growing pile. Oil and gunpowder bite the throat. A chair leg snaps. Someone laughs once, then swallows it hard. Outside, the red wash of fire already stains the White House lawn. A torch dips. The pile catches with a dry whump, and heat surges at the ceiling. In another room, a portrait stares through haze while the president's house begins to burn. 2 days earlier, August 22nd, 1814, British transports had landed seasoned troops on the Patuxent River at Benedict, Maryland. Major General Robert Ross led the soldiers. Rear Admiral George Cockburn directed the naval arm. Washington lay within reach if they moved fast. President James Madison called for militia. Brigadier General William Winder gathered a force heavy with short-term volunteers and thin on drill. Maryland and Virginia militia, a handful of U.S. regulars, sailors, and Marines under Commodore Joshua Barney. They watched the British push upriver, burning American gunboats scuttled to deny capture. Barney argued to stand and fight at the waterways he knew. Winder kept falling back on roads that funneled to the capital. On August 24th, the British column marched through heat and dust toward the little town of Bladensburg, northeast of Washington. Winder drew his line on the heights beyond the bridge over the eastern branch of the Potomac. The defenders had numbers on paper, not in quality. Ross deployed veterans from the Peninsular War, men who had fought the French in Spain and pushed to the bridge. When American artillery opened, the first British ranks went down, but the fire was not sustained. The British found a ford, poured across, and advanced by rushes. Maryland militia broke and ran for the rear. The retreat became a rout. Later it was branded the Bladensburg Races. In the middle of that collapse, Barney's sailors and Marines held. They fired canister from naval guns posted on the road and drove back British light infantry in 2 sharp blasts. Barney's line fell only when flanked. Wounded and captured, he praised the enemy's discipline and the bravery of his own men. With the road to Washington open, Ross kept moving. Dolly Madison had packed since morning. At the president's house, she ordered staff to secure critical papers, silver, and the full-length portrait of George Washington painted by Gilbert Stuart. The frame was too large to fit through the doorway. Workers cut it from the stretcher and carried the canvas away. She left minutes ahead of British advance parties, the city already emptying. The Madisons fled toward Virginia. Government clerks carted records south. The streets emptied. Ross and Cockburn reached the city just before dusk. They had orders against private plunder. Their target was the machinery of American government. At the Capitol, troops stacked furniture in the chambers, doused it, and lit the pile. At the Capitol, the Library of Congress burned with the chambers, destroying thousands of volumes collected since 1800. The dome of that era, low and wooden, collapsed into the rotunda. At the president's house, servants had laid a table for a state dinner before the evacuation. British officers reportedly ate what they found, then set rooms alight. Flames leapt up stairwells and licked at the Library of Congress, then housed in the Capitol itself. Columns cracked in the heat and ceilings fell. At the War and Treasury departments, fire crews did the same. Cockburn walked the halls of the National Intelligencer newspaper and ordered presses destroyed to silence a voice that had mocked him. The Patent Office, spared after Superintendent William Thornton argued inventions served all nations, stood alone among public buildings. At the Navy Yard, the flames came from American hands. Realizing the stores could not be defended, officials set fire to the yard, ships, and munitions to prevent capture. The frigate Columbia burned in place. The new 44-gun frigate in frame went up with it. Across the river, the Greenleaf Point arsenal exploded in a chain of blasts when heat reached powder, shock waves rolling across the flats. Night thickened over a city of sparks. In the east room of the White House, soldiers fed the blaze. Cockburn walked the empty house with a lamp, checked rooms, and left a mocking note for the president before the heat forced everyone out. Roof beams went one by one. The walls held, blackened shells in a city without a government. Then the weather turned. On August 25th, a violent storm swept in. A hard rain and a twisting wind remembered as a tornado by witnesses who saw debris lift and spin through the streets. Lightning struck, and the downpour knocked flames flat. Houses collapsed under the wind. The storm damaged British camps and toppled chimneys the fires had spared. By morning, smoke hung in wet air over a capital of foundations and ash. Ross weighed his position. The British could not hold Washington with a small expedition, and Baltimore, better defended, richer in prizes, and a target of long planning, waited up the bay. After less than 48 hours in the city, the British column marched out. They had destroyed what they came to destroy: the President's House, the Capitol, the Treasury, the War and State Departments, and nearby military works. They left private dwellings largely alone and kept discipline that prevented a sack. The shock for Americans was total. A European army had marched into the national capital and burned its core. Madison's cabinet reassembled in lodgings and farmhouses across the Potomac. Ordinary citizens picked through ruins for anything worth saving. The Library of Congress lay in wet cinders. The Capitol's dome, then a low wooden structure, was gone. The White House stood roofless, walls scorched to pink stone beneath the paint. The symbolism was as painful as the loss of offices. In a war many citizens had doubted, Washington's fall felt like a verdict. Recovery began even as the war raged. Congress met in temporary quarters in the Patent Office and later the Brick Capitol. Architect Benjamin Henry Latrobe and later Charles Bulfinch drew plans to rebuild the Capitol stronger, with fireproofing and a new center. Work on the President's House moved in stages. Stonemasons repaired the aquea sandstone and repainted the exterior, a coat that fed the habit of calling it the White House. Madison returned to a city that looked like a construction site and pressed for the defense of Baltimore, the next likely blow. That blow fell in September. Ross led the army toward Baltimore and was killed by American sharpshooters at North Point. The fleet hammered Fort McHenry, but could not force the harbor. Francis Scott Key, watching the bombardment from a truce ship, saw the flag at dawn and later wrote, "The Star-Spangled Banner." By winter, negotiations in Ghent signaled the endgame of the war. News of Andrew Jackson's separate victory at New Orleans would arrive after the treaty, but the terms held, captured territory restored, grievances unresolved, but the war over. Back in Washington, the rebuild advanced year by year. In 1815, Thomas Jefferson sold his personal library to Congress to replace the one burned in the Capitol, expanding the range of subjects and setting a tone for the institution. The city recovered slowly, the scars visible in bare lots, and blackened stone recycled into new walls. Public memory settled on two images: a first lady saving a portrait and a storm that drowned a foreign fire. Beneath those were hard lessons, about militia that fled when pressed, about the need for trained regulars and ready defenses, and about how fast a capital can be reached when the enemy knows the rivers and roads. The raid on Washington did not win the war for Britain. It did not break the United States, but it stamped a warning that outlived the treaty's ink. Public buildings would be rebuilt, stronger. Professional forces would be funded, better. The next time an enemy neared the capital, Americans planned to have more than hope and a thin line at a bridge. Out of the smoke and the mud came a sober resolve that shaped the young republic's next decades. If you stand today on Capitol Hill and look toward the river, it takes effort to see the low wooden dome that once sat there, or the flames that jumped room to room. the stone and iron that replaced it, rose from that night when a red glow lit the sky, and soldiers, veterans of a different continent's wars, did exactly what they had marched 8 miles to do. Thank you for listening to Last Post History. Subscribe for more true stories from the world at war.